Answers Live, 888-318-7884. Joe Heschmeyer, a renowned expert on the Catholic faith. Those are not my words. I'm quoting someone. We'll explain who I'm quoting in a moment. Joe Heschmeyer, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Although I would quibble with your description. I don't think you're quoting someone.
You know, that's true. I'm not actually quoting someone, but we'll have to explain that in a moment as well. That's an important metaphysical distinction to make. Joe, however, I cannot go on without mentioning you're wearing a suit coat today, and I think you look just marvelous. But I will say this as a critique: I think that coat washes you out just a little bit.
My wife will be very thrilled to hear you say that. So before the show, I had a moment of generosity and said that it looked nice that I was wearing a suit coat. Exactly. And I told him my wife hates this jacket and was very displeased when I put it on. She begrudgingly admitted that it worked with my shirt, but said, I hate that color on you. It washes you out. And I thought, well, you left it in the closet where I could find it. You should have thrown it away. Or
That's your job.
It away. But
throw it away. If you don't want them to have it, throw it away.
There's all sorts of clothes that go missing, and she hopes it will discourage me from buying ugly clothes. But it does the opposite.
Well, I actually think you look very nice today, Joe. For you. 888-318-7884 is the number. 888-318-7884. Joe, occasionally you and I engage in what is loosely referred to as banter. And
yes,
they have a new thing. This is to explain that mysterious statement where that I was quoting someone who is not a someone. They have a thing now called artificial intelligence. And some of the young geniuses around here, primarily Zach, who is about to be married. Zach is getting married next month. And he's one of those, Zach is, as everybody knows, one of those super high intelligence people who can just not, he never can just, leave well enough alone. He's got to find some new thing. And he found AI. And so he said to the AI, write an intro for Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live about how he is good at answering tough questions. And then this is what the AI wrote, artificial intelligence on the internet. It searches the internet, I guess, and in about a fraction of a second, it comes up with an introduction for you that I'm supposed to read on the air. And some of these things are freakish, but I will now introduce you, Joe, as Skynet wants me to introduce you. This is Skynet's introduction of Joe Heschmeyer. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, never would I say ladies and gentlemen. So right there, right out of the box, no, but... Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joe Heschmeyer to the show. Joe is a renowned expert on the Catholic faith and is known for his ability to skillfully and clearly address even the toughest questions on the topic. He has dedicated his career to studying and explaining the Catholic Church's teachings, and his deep understanding of the subject matter makes him an invaluable asset to our program. So without further ado, another thing, I would never say without further ado. Let's give a warm welcome to Joe Heschmeyer. I guess the AI thinks that you clap or something on the radio, so I'll do the clapping for the audience, but welcome, Joe.
Thanks. I think I can very faintly hear all of the colors, clapping or,
can you hear
driving
that?
around
the
show,
clapping
on the road.
So they went on to ask, right? This is what they asked the artificial intelligence machine to do.
This is Zach, who is a human being.
Who has very high intelligence himself. Write a verbal exchange of witty banter between Catholic Answers Live host Cy Kellett and Catholic Answers staff apologist Joe Heschmeyer. So the artificial intelligence went into the internet, I guess, and found transcripts of us, and then it wrote witty banter between the two of us. And it wrote it in the form of a script. So it says host Cy Kellett, and then there's what I say, and then it says Joe Heschmeyer, and then it says Cy Kellett.
You know what? If you want to do it together, I will read my part if you want to read your part.
All right.
In fact, if you want to do the rest of the show pre-scripted by AI, we could try that next time.
This is you and I opening the show according to an artificial intelligence computer. That's what we're about to do. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado. No, that's not part of it. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm your host, Cy Kellett, and I'm joined today by one of our staff apologists, Joe Heschmeyer. Joe, I hear you have a few answers for some tough questions we've been getting from our listeners.
Shy, tough questions are my bread and butter. I live for this stuff.
My bread and butter. Well, let's see if you're really as good as you say you are. Our first caller is on the line, and they want to know, why does the church oppose contraception? Wait, break. I have to take a break. So the AI searches the internet, and it thinks that the primary thing you and I talk about, Joe, is contraception. Like, that's the number one thought. Well, that's probably what they're going to tackle. So...
Well, I also like that instead of an actual caller calling in, you're just like, let me just tell you what this caller wanted to ask.
I know, right? We don't go to the caller. We just okay. So I'll do my part again, and then you can do your part. Well, let's see if you're really as good as you say you are. Our first caller is on.
I love that you're even a jerk in AI.
That's true. The AI kind of makes me All right, I'm starting again, Joe. Now you've upset me. Well, let's see if you're really as good as you say you are. Our first caller is on the line, and they want to know, why does the church oppose contraception?
That's a great question, Cy. The church's opposition to contraception is rooted in the belief that every act of sexual intercourse should be open to the possibility of new life. Contraceptives fundamentally separate the unitive and procreative aspects of sex, breaking the bond of love that God intended for married couples.
First of all, when they showed me that that's what the computer said, I was like, this computer is really good at explaining the Catholic faith. Like,
this computer is better than 90% of Catholics at explaining contraception.
Like, wasn't that good?
That was legitimately a good answer.
It's legitimately a good answer.
I was honored to have my name next to an answer clearer than what I probably would have said to that.
Right. It's nice, and it's compact, and it's direct, and it addresses the question. So let's go on with what the AI had to say about that. Okay, Joe, you're off to a good start. But can you explain it in a way that even I can understand? Again, I am offended that even the AI thinks I'm dumb. Like, can you explain it in a way that even I can understand? I'm mad at the AI now. Go ahead.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I don't know where it's gleaning all of these impressions about our character, but it's a very advanced computer. Who am I to second judge it? Well, so I think of it this way. God designed sex to be a way for husband and wife to express their love for each other and to create new life. The contraceptives treat babies as a problem to be avoided instead of a blessing to be welcomed. The church's position is that this is not in line with God's plan for marriage and family life.
Again, the AI is better than most humans at explaining the church's. The AI is really a really good Catholic. It doesn't like me, but it's a really good Catholic.
I know a few Catholics who fall in that category.
All right, Joe. I think it's time we go to calls, Joe. There is another one where it asked about why we call Mary the Mother of God, but I'm going to save that one.
Actually, before we get, I want to at least give what you say in response. Wow, that was actually pretty clear. I might even be able to explain it to my mother-in-law. Like, you're just gratuitously insulting in the AI script.
Like, I insult my mother-in-law, God rest her soul. Like, the AI doesn't know that my mother-in-law has passed, but I'm just a jerk to everybody. That's how the artificial intelligence, which has searched the entire internet, has decided, wow, that's pretty clear. I might even be able to explain it to my mother-in-law. Ha ha ha. So apparently I make mother-in-law jokes. I say weird things like, without further ado. That's my shtick. We have to go to a break, Joe. When we come back, we'll let real people talk to you. But I have to say, the AI is pretty impressive. And if anybody thinks we're not being serious, we're quite serious. This is actually written by a computer that made some kind of attempt to imitate Joe and I. And I thought it did it made a better Joe than Joe, and it made a worse me than me. That's where I'm leaving this, Joe. That's what I'm taking away from this. We'll be right back with actual human beings on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
It's really awe-inspiring to know that Take Two with Jerry and Debbie has the impact that it does. We know from what our listeners share on the air, but also from corresponding with them outside of the show via email and social media. There's no better feeling than knowing you've helped someone, maybe many people at a time, work through various situations and to more clearly see God's purpose and plan for their lives.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, tomorrow, noon Eastern, on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kelly, your host. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest, and the mysterious power behind all of this is an artificial intelligence machine. At least it was for the first segment, but now we will go to real, actual human callers. But it was a bit uncanny how good that AI was at doing the show. It's somewhat frightening to me. I mean, I really do. I mean, there are, I'm sure, in the long run, Joe, moral implications to all of this, because there's the machines will be able to fool us, and that will have very negative consequences for people's ability to trust in the world around them.
Oh, you know, the so-called Turing test. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but Alan Turing proposed a test.
Wait.
That you
just
can
explain it in a way that even my mother-in-law could understand. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
So
thanks.
the Turing test is a test of artificial intelligence, which is, can it fool a human on the other end, where they can't tell if they're talking to a computer or talking to a human being. And it's actually been passed multiple times. It was passed, I think, a couple decades ago with a very simple, insult generator, where it turns out that there's certain modes where if you just teach it to say rude things, the people get so mad they don't realize that, that could literally just be a script. And it just is saying these insulting things. So, yeah, the Turing test, we've blown past that, but people still talk about it like that's the next kind of hurdle to clear.
All right, I'm going to go to the phones, but I will tell you this, just to entice people. Maybe we'll publish it somewhere. Zach also asked the computer, the AI that can search the entire internet, to produce a debate between Taylor Marshall and Father James Martin on, what was it on, how to receive communion or
Reverence and Mass.
Reverence and Mass.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
Reverence and the Mass. Yeah, they did the pineapples on pizza too. But I have not read the transcript of that one, but apparently it's quite a fascinating debate between fake Taylor Marshall and fake Father James Martin debating how to be reverent at Mass. All right, Joe, let's go to the phones. You ready?
Yeah.
Jack in Raleigh, North Carolina, listening on Divine Mercy Radio. You are numero uno today, Jack. Glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Thanks so much for having me. I will definitely be Googling what that debate looks like after this for sure.
All right, I'll have to figure out somewhere where we can post it.
Great, but my question is, we are Roman Catholics, my family and I, but we have been attending a Eastern Byzantine Catholic parish for a couple of months now, and really have had a lot of spiritual growth from it, and we're actually debating on if we wanted to make this our parish or not. So my question is one, am I allowed to make a Eastern Catholic parish my parish as a Westerner? And then also, what would that implications be for my kids who are coming up on sacrament ages? So First Communion, obviously in the East, they receive all of their sacraments of initiation at baptism. So what would that look for that we would need to do? Would we have to go back to the Latin church, or the normal church that we would go to do First Communion prep, or any guidance there would be helpful?
Great. No, that's a fantastic question. And here we want to create a little bit of a distinction. Parish registration is not a thing in canon law. So whether you're registered at a parish or not, you won't find canon law that governs that, because that's a made-up thing that we do here for efficiency reasons, really. In the same way that, like, getting on the parish's email list, there's no canon law on that, because you do it or you don't do it. So there are those. That's one thing. The other thing is actual enrollment in the church, and that's a different thing. And so enrollment in the church is a real canonical idea, that you actually are by virtue of baptism or because you've transferred rights, a member of the Latin Rite or another, what's called the ritual church. And as you kind of alluded to, that enrollment has really important implications for marriage law, for when and how you receive the sacraments, and all kinds of questions kind of come up there. So you, by virtue of the church into which you're baptized, are, in your case, a member of the Latin Church. And Canon 111 and 112 kind of lay this out. So in Canon 111, your children, because both you and your wife, I assume, are members of the Latin Church, your children are also members of the Latin Church upon baptism, even if they're baptized, Maronite or Byzantine, whatever it is. They are canonically Latin Catholics. You and they have the same obligations, because it would be chaotic if you've got different liturgical calendars at home. The kids are celebrating Great Lent and you're not even in Lent yet, or something like that. It would be a mess. But then after you've been baptized, Canon 111, Section 2 says anyone who, Section 2 of 111 deals with those who are being baptized later on, get to pick kind of where and how they want to be baptized when they're first entering the church. That doesn't apply in your case. It doesn't sound like. Canon 112 is the one, but if you're enrolled in one church, how do you join another church? And the short answer is that you do it either with the permission of the Vatican or at the time of marriage. If you're marrying someone of a different rite, that's the time in which you can switch over, or if there's kids who have, one parent is one and one are the other. But then it says very clearly, Canon 112, Section 2, the practice, however prolonged, of receiving the sacraments according to the rite of another ritual church sui juris, that means of its own law, does not entail enrollment in that church. So you could spend the rest of your life going faithfully every Sunday, every day, to a Byzantine parish, to a Maronite parish, whatever the case may be. And without some formal act of enrollment, you don't become canonically a member of that church, and neither do your children. And so the reason that matters, as I've kind of alluded to, are certain sacramental things. So when you get married, that's an important one to know. What canon law am I bound by? What canon law is the person I'm wanting to be married bound by? And is there anything we need to know? Because if you marry someone who's an Eastern Catholic, it has to be in an Eastern Catholic church, or you need a dispensation on their side. We don't have that kind of restriction, but there are special ways of kind of protecting the Eastern Rite so they don't get totally swallowed up by the Latin Rite, because we're about 9 times bigger than all of the Eastern rites put together. And so to make sure they don't go extinct, there's special canonical provisions around things like marriage. The other is, as you said, if your children are going to a parish where everyone around them has already received First Communion with baptism, they've already received confirmation, then you really have to take it upon yourself to make sure that at the right age they're receiving First Communion preparation and confirmation preparation. And it won't be as natural as, well, this is when the parish does it. So you have a few more kind of obligations and responsibilities just to be mindful of as a parent, but you are not bound to only go to a Latin Rite service. You're not bound to only go to the Mass instead of the Divine Liturgy, but you are canonically Latin, and there are a few implications to that. Is that clear?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So at this point, I mean, we're still just kind of discerning and praying with this and all of that, but that definitely gives me a lot of guidance. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Jack.
Wonderful.
So, thanks very much for the call.
Absolutely. Hopefully your mother-in-law could understand that.
Come on now, Joe. Jack's mother-in-law is, unlike my mother-in-law, apparently, is a perfectly intelligent woman. Somebody on YouTube says they don't even believe this is real video of us. They think this is just all deep fake.
I would hope that if there was a deep fake video, they could do a better job than this. Abraham Lincoln was told he was a two-faced, and he said, if I was two-faced, would I choose this one?
Yeah, that's right. If I was going to be a deep fake, would I choose this? Dale in West Virginia, watching on YouTube. You are up next, Dale. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hello, Cy and Joe. Joe, you're one of my favorites. I have a couple of your books. However, in a recent episode, Joe said that in responding to a call, let the person know that Second Maccabees is not in Protestant or ancient Jewish Bibles, And the thought in my head, of course, was that it wasn't in ancient Jewish Bibles either. I'm sorry, he said it wasn't in modern Jewish Bibles. And so my question is, as a Protestant who loves listening to the show but also frequently argues with it, but I do love your banter and I do enjoy the show, I've spent a lot of time on the Deuterocanonicals. I'm familiar with the history and the councils and popes, cardinals, medieval commentaries and all that did not accept them and said it were canonical, and I'm aware of councils that said they were canonical. Is there any information, Joe, that you can give me that might move the needle for me, who feels like I've seen and read and heard it all on this topic, toward the Catholic position? I am open to the Catholic Church, but the Deuterocanonicals are a big stumbling block. I believe that the Council of Trent made a mistake there in reaction to the Reformation. So anything you can give me that might help, Joe?
My pleasure. I'm happy to accept that challenge. First of all, love that you call on the show. I also love that you do the thing I do where you listen to people you argue with while you're listening to. I just feel less crazy to hear someone else does that.
I
actually,
love you. I think you guys are great people. So.
Oh, no, thank you. I already
AI
like you.
doesn't.
So
AI thinks I'm a jerk. But
yeah, I mean,
Joe's
you make everybody else look good.
Joe's a very bright guy. He's one of my favorites, and I'll put that out there. Like I said, I have a couple of your books I've read several times and really enjoy. So go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'll give you a short answer. I'm going to point you to a longer answer. If you go to shamelessjoe.com, shamelessjoe.com, that'll actually take you to a page on the Catholic Answers website for my new podcast. And the new podcast is called Shameless Popery. But in case people don't want to try to spell popery. Oh, good. Well, the very first episode is called The Bible in the Time of Jesus. And it explores this question about what did the Bible look like at the time of Jesus? Because the problem is there isn't a single Jewish Bible in Jesus's day. And so today, when you talk about the Jewish Bible, you're talking about the Tanakh, which is a Hebrew acronym that stands for the law, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. But at the time of Jesus, the law and the prophets are very clearly set by most Jews. Some, like the Samaritans, still object to the prophets. And then some, if you consider the Samaritans Jews, it's a little complicated. They've got their own version of the Torah. But basically, the Torah and the prophets are set, the law and the prophets. And so Jesus refers very regularly to the law and the prophets, the law and the prophets, the law and the prophets. This third section called the writings was a little more amorphous at the time. And so there wasn't universal agreement about which books did and didn't belong in the writings section. And so you'll find books like Sirach quoted in the Jewish Talmud as scripture, explicitly saying that it's scripture, quoting it and putting it in the writing section. And then you'll find other books like the Song of Songs and Esther and Ecclesiastes, which were viewed as not part of the writing section. So the Jewish Bible isn't actually set until probably about the 3rd century. There's some controversy about the dating, but it's almost certainly set well after the time of Christ. You'll find people like Josephus who argue for what becomes the Jewish Bible in the late 1st century. But you won't find any clear evidence at the time of Jesus or before the time of Jesus that said here were the books that were recognized in Judaism. And so there's a much more amorphous kind of boundary. So all that's to say, some Jews very clearly treated 1st and 2nd Maccabees as inspired scripture. When Origen is writing about which books the Jews of his day hold, he includes most of the books that are in the modern Jewish Bible, and also includes 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and actually tells us what the Hebrew name for those books was. That's about the year 200. So we know some Jews considered 1st and 2nd Maccabees to be inspired. We also know that 1st and 2nd Maccabees are where the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah comes from. You won't find Hanukkah in a modern Jewish or Protestant Old Testament. You will find it there. It's what's called the Feast of Dedication, because it was the rededication of the temple after it had been desecrated. And in John 10, we find Jesus celebrating the Feast of Dedication. So we know at the time of Jesus, this was considered a religious holiday, not the modern kind of version of Hanukkah as a festival of lights, but a Feast of Dedication in the temple, which is coming from 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So that points to it having a status that it doesn't have today within Judaism or within Protestantism. So there's much more, like I said, that could be said about that. But the idea that, Jews at the time of Jesus had the same Old Testament Protestants do today, there's not really any good evidence for that.
Dale, I'd like to hear your response to what Joe had to say, and I want to give you a book and some ideas for some books. But if you're going to have to hang on through the break, if you'd like to continue the conversation, we sure would like to. We'll do that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade was a monumental victory for the pro-life movement. But the fight is far from over. With our new booklet, Why We're Pro-Life, we have produced the perfect tool to prepare you to have peaceful and convincing conversations to shed light on the truth about human life from conception to natural death. Catholic Answers is printing millions of copies of this booklet, and we plan simply to give them away. You can help us in two ways. First, by generously supporting this project. 25 cents prints one book. $2,500 prints 10,000, and so on. Second, by helping us distribute the booklet through your parish, your school, or the pro-life ministry you work with. Catholic Answers is going to blanket the country with why we're pro-life, but only if you step up and help us. Thank you so much. For more information, visit whyweareprolife.com.
As a child, the great theologian Thomas Aquinas asked, "What is God?" Best-selling author Kevin Vost's new book follows the mature thought of Aquinas in answering that question. In clear and approachable fashion, What is God examines God's attributes and considers questions about him that have vexed mankind for centuries. Order your copy of What is God today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Janet Williams. We bring you the truth of the Catholic faith on Women of Grace tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, heading right back to the conversation we were just engaged in, but I do need to remind you that over at shop.catholic.com, we're having that 23-23-23 New Year's special for the dawn of the new year, 2023. Spend $23 or more in the online shop, shop.catholic.com. Then enter the promo code New Year at checkout, and you save 23%. It's that easy. Just don't forget the promo code New Year when you check out at shop.catholic.com. Joe Heschmeyer is our guest, and on the phone is Dale in West Virginia, and we're talking about the place that certain books, like the third book of Maccabees, have in the Bible, and
First and Second Maccabees.
First and Second, is that right, Dale? First and Second Maccabees, is that what you said?
Yeah. What book have you been reading? What Bible have you been reading?
I know, because there is a third Maccabees, but it's not in anybody's Bible. But the book I wanted to recommend to you, Dale, was Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger by Gary Michuta. And I don't know if you've seen that one, but I'd be happy to send it to you because we publish it. And I just wanted to recommend Gary Michuta as a resource on this for someone who has done you know him?
Oh yeah. Been there, done that. His YouTube channel, his debate with James White, I've watched so many times.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, and him on other podcasts. Oh yeah, very familiar with Gary Michuta, and just nothing seems to get me across the line. And I will say, Joe's point about Hanukkah, I thought was a good one. The historical issues in the book of Judith have been particularly problematic for me, or scandalous for me. Historical, factual issues in Judith. So if it weren't for things like that, it'd probably be easier to swallow. But like the as far as reigning in Nineveh, or I don't remember the details, but there's and the temple being supposedly rebuilt before it was actually destroyed, or possibly vice versa. I'm sure Joe knows exactly what I'm talking about. So that had been particularly problematic, like the historical issues in Judith or whatever, has kind of been. But so with that, compared to lots of people not considering them canonical, like medieval commentaries and Cardinal Cayetan and Jimenez and Pope Gregory, I believe, and lots of others down through church fathers, it's just been kind of wishy-washy. And so I've long had the opinion that those that did accept it and councils that did accept it did so out of, for reasons of tradition or ignorance. They just simply didn't know. But so go ahead.
Well, yeah, I would say there's a real sense in which you have two categories of books. In both the Old and New Testament, there are some books that are really uncontroversial, and then there are some books that are more controversial. These are called the spoken against books, anti-legomena in Greek. That these are the books that are more disputed. And so books like 2 Peter, the book of Revelation, Hebrews, these are going to be like that in the New Testament. And then, books like Judith, 1st and 2nd Maccabees and the like are like that in the Old Testament. So I would just say two very basic things. First, be very careful not to have a different standard for the books that you accept and the books that you reject. If you say, I'm not going to accept any book of the Bible where it doesn't agree with modern history, that's a fine standard, but just know that you would have to apply that consistently and logically and say, all right, well, historians don't believe in the Exodus, so I have to throw out Exodus. Or historians don't believe in this, that, or the other thing. And so if the standard is that anything that looks like an error historically, geographically, whatever the case, if that's the standard, if you say, I'll only accept Bibles that agree with modern scholarship, you're going to have a very small Bible. So that's one way you could go. I would just say whatever standard you hold, be principled and just have one standard and not one standard for books you accept and one for books that you reject. The second
go ahead, Joe.
Is that historically there's a role for the church. That if you want to know which books are in the Bible doesn't tell you that. The church tells you that. And when I say the church tells you that, I don't just mean in a top-down kind of way. A lot of the process of figuring out which books are and aren't in the Bible is much more kind of bottom-up. That local councils will confirm what people had kind of figured out on the ground about which books do and don't belong. And so ultimately, we're not just trusting in the authority of the church, we're trusting in the authority of God's revelation. And so this is a point, I actually make this point in the first episode of the podcast, Shameless Popery, if you go check it out, that James White, of all people, actually makes really beautifully, where he just says, we have to trust that the same God who reveals himself also makes clear what that revelation is. And I'm paraphrasing him. He may say it somewhat differently. But the idea is really simple. If you say God revealed himself, but he didn't tell us which books were and weren't his revelation, or if God revealed himself, but nobody understood what he was trying to say to us, that's a failure on the part of revelation. Not that someone's going to misinterpret the Bible. That's always going to happen. But if nobody knows which books are and aren't in the Bible, or if no one knows what the books of the Bible mean, then God hasn't really revealed himself. Revelation means unveiling. Like, what is God actually unveiling? Well, he's unveiling himself. He's unveiling the truth about himself. And so it's not enough for him to give us letters. He has to give us meaning. And so if no one understood the meaning of the Bible, or if no one understood even which books were and weren't in the Bible, then he hasn't really revealed himself. So I'd say on the basis of the logic of revelation, that we have to believe that the God who chooses to reveal himself didn't trick the entire church into accepting the wrong Bible. And that's what you would have to believe to hold the 66-book canon, that virtually everyone from, say, 500 to 1500 of just ordinary Christian believers didn't know what books were in the Bible. In fact, they were confident on the basis of the authority of the church that there were 73 books in the Bible, and they'd been tricked and they were wrong. In the same way that if someone came along today and said, hey, there's actually only 50 books in the Bible, everybody's wrong except for me, you would look at that person and say, that's ridiculous. That's an outrageous position. Well, I think you can say something similar, because ultimately it's not about trusting this church theologian or that council. It's about trusting, does God know how to reveal himself or not?
Dale, we will leave it there. Thank you very, very much for the call. It was a wonderful conversation. I misspoke before.
I hope he calls back. I love Dale.
I just want to say, I said Third Maccabees is not in anyone's Bible. That was shorthand. It's not in a Protestant or a Catholic Bible, but of course Armenian Catholics and Coptic Catholics or Christians and some other Eastern churches have Third Maccabees. So if you are among those, I apologize. I didn't mean it that way. I just meant that neither Protestants nor Catholics have it in their Bible. I'm going to go to John in Switzerland, watching on YouTube. John, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hey guys, first of all, I'm a simple man. I see Joe Heschmeyer, I call. So I
like
to quickly, again, thank you for your work, because I know I called a few times and I didn't thank you last times, but I wanted to tell you again how you changed many things in my life and in my family too. So thank you, Catholic Answers. You always do an amazing job. My question is this. I've been debating with Protestants a lot, let's say lately, and I admit that the challenge isn't really exciting anymore. I feel like I've kind of run the whole thing again and again, and I decided to tackle the Orthodox position lately and raise the bar a little bit. And the last time I called, we spoke about how the Orthodox could venerate popes and what it said about the historical reality of the schism. And I thought the Orthodox, until that moment, basically the issue was about the filioque and some details about purgatory or Mary or the papacy, of course. And then I started lately to look closely at Palamism, and my gosh, I didn't realize how bad that was, and I especially consider the distinction between essence and energies. And to summarize my question, I go into it right now. Knowing that the sacraments of the Orthodox are valid because of the apostolic succession, but they are also in a pretty serious state of heresy, I think, how far can they push? How far can people get away from the theology of the Church and its authority before they start compromising the validity of the sacrament? Is there such a limit? Is there a rule? Is there does it have to be decided by a council or a pope? How does that work? I have no idea.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's make a few important distinctions. So thinking very broadly, if someone rejects something related to the priesthood, that's going to be a pretty direct attack on sacramental efficacy, right? Like if you say, I don't believe in the real presence and I don't believe the Mass is a sacrifice, and then you go and try to celebrate Mass, well, you're not really celebrating Mass because you've denied the thing that you claim you're trying to do. This was the issue within the Anglican Church, that Anglicans initially had valid sacraments because they had a valid priesthood. You know, the Church in England mostly broke away at the king's orders from the Roman Catholic Church, and they were still priests, they were still bishops. But then over time, heretical theology came in, and the issue wasn't just that it was heretical theology, but heretical theology that denied the priesthood. And so those kind of attacks are really, if you will, sort of existential attacks. Well, likewise, something like a denial of the Trinity is going to be an existential attack on Christianity. And so someone in those cases, if they say, I don't believe Jesus is God, well, then whatever they're doing in baptism, they're not offering a Trinitarian baptism. They're not, then you don't have valid sacraments there. So those are really kind of serious issues. Those would be things that would render a sacrament invalid. Anything that undermines sacramental intent, where you no longer believe in the thing that the sacrament does. But just being heretical about something else does not actually automatically make it so your sacraments are invalid. That's the first issue. Like, you could be wrong on some really important issue unrelated to the sacraments and still have valid sacraments. The second is, well, what do we make of Palamism and kind of the Eastern theology about this? And so I would say, just broadly, if the Church hasn't condemned something as heresy, we don't want to kind of do that in their place. I agree that the essence energies distinction is a very strange kind of view of what the beatific vision would look like from from my own understanding of this theology, I have not explored maybe in the same level and same depth that I should have. But it's worth acknowledging that even within the kind of world of Catholic theologians, you're going to have different views about what the afterlife looks like, for the simple reason that eye has not seen, ear has not heard. So you'll find some subtle distinctions between Aquinas and Bonaventure about the way love and faith work in heaven. And then you'll also find differences in terms of whether we continue to grow in knowledge, grow in love for eternity. So you'll find theologians on both sides of this question. So someone getting something wrong about the afterlife, particularly in an area that hasn't been condemned, doesn't invalidate, doesn't threaten the sacraments. The things that would threaten it would be anything that attacks at an existential order what it is to be Christian, or what it is to offer that particular sacrament, or what it is to be a priest. Those kind of things that are closely related to the sacraments would be the things that you'd have to really watch out for.
Okay, John?
Yeah, thank you a lot. In my mind, the distinction between essence and energy was a kind of attack on the Trinity, but maybe I'm a little too harsh on that. But I should dig more. Thank you very much for the answer.
I mean, it may have some bad Trinitarian implications that are unintended, but the Eastern Orthodox would heartily affirm belief in the Trinity. So it may be that they're wrong on some theology. That's different than somebody who just says, I deny the Trinity, I reject the Trinity, or something like that.
And the other thing about Gregory is that lots of Catholics have called him a saint. So he's not a canonized saint of the Catholic Church, but I think even Pope John Paul II referred to him as Saint Gregory Palamas. John, I'm going to say thanks because we got to go to a break. We'll be right back with more Joe Heschmeyer Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on, we'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, teaching the truth.
I really can't get enough Catholic teaching now that I'm back. I've been back about 8-9 years. It was due in part to Catholic radio, television, and learned so much.
I get most of my news from EWTN. EWTN is just wonderful. I especially love the Sunday Masses.
Both you guys were a magnificent resource in my journey to come into full communion with the Catholic Church, and thank you very much for being there.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, Joe Heschmeyer. Our guest, we were just discussing at the break how the fact of sanctity doesn't necessarily mean a person has correct insights on everything. It's just interesting, the fact that we sometimes think a saint is a person who you could trust every word they said. Well, you could trust every word they said in the sense that they're not liars or something, but it doesn't mean the fact that you lived a holy and sanctified life doesn't mean that you always got everything correct. You might have voted for the wrong person, or you might have backed the wrong. In one case, in St. Vincent's case, backed the wrong pope. Accidentally backed the anti-pope. But that one, of course, he changed his mind on. But it doesn't mean you're necessarily a great theologian. It would be a horrible thing, actually, if you had to be a great theologian to be a saint, Joe.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, one of the things that I like to say is that salvation is not a theology quiz. Having good theology is really helpful for a lot of reasons. For two reasons. One, because if you don't know God, you can't love him. And two, because if you love God, you want to know more about him. So that's, I think, just, something to kind of bear in mind with this. But we don't want to ever reduce it, just to a theology quiz.
No, because the basics of the good news are quite simple. And so even a child could be a saint so long as they have accepted in faith the grace that God has given them. There's nothing.
Exactly. So a child who dies, the holy grandmother who was illiterate but lived a life of holiness and loved Jesus. That again, it's just something to it's very tempting. And I think one of the reasons it's very tempting is because if you're a very smart person or a person who likes to read a lot about theology, the idea that that's going to save your soul rather than actually needing to trust God and to love your neighbor, it's actually easier in a lot of ways to say, well, if you just read some more books, you'll go to heaven.
Yeah, right. As soon as I get done with Aquinas, then I'll be ready for heaven. That is not how that works. But nope. you were saying to me at the break. I said before we went to the break that John Paul had called Gregory Palamas a saint. You said that Benedict had called him.
Well, I was mistaken about that. There was but it was actually the ecumenical patriarch. It was a joint thing, but it looks like it was the Eastern Orthodox patriarch who called him, which of course he's going to call him a saint.
Yeah.
But he was saying it in a talk with Benedict before a group of bishops.
Let's go to Vincent in British Columbia, Canada, listening on Catholic.com. Vincent, go ahead with your question for Joe.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you as well.
Good afternoon. About defending Vatican II teachings with regards to a lot of friends of mine attend Society of St. Pius X. And it seems like they're quite disturbed with most everything that came out of the Vatican Council and reject pretty much the whole council altogether. Is there any literature, or how do you defend Vatican II and the subsequent teachings?
It's a great question. So it's a very broad question, right? Like it would help to know what the very particular issues are that they struggle with. And Benedict XIV famously described two ways of kind of understanding Vatican II: this hermeneutic of rupture or a hermeneutic of reform. It's sometimes called a hermeneutic of continuity. He uses reform. In other words, do we view Vatican II as building on what the Church has always believed and responding to new problems in a new way? Or do we view Vatican II as actually rejecting the history of the Church and trying to just create a new church with new teachings and the like? And it might be worth pointing out just the vote counts on the documents, because it's usually like 5,000 bishops to 9. Are we really going to believe that the bishops in the 1960s were so corrupt and so pagan or so unchristian, so un-Catholic, that they would readily just vote to replace Catholic teaching universally? Because people like Lefebvre were in favor of the actual documents of Vatican II. Archbishop Lefebvre, the founder of SSPX, was not in favor of how Vatican II was implemented, but that introduces a really important question. You can be in favor of the documents themselves and still say the implementation of the documents was rough, that it was at times unfaithful to the documents itself, that it maybe caused more problems than it solved. All of those are totally valid positions one could hold without rejecting Vatican II. So I don't know if that's helpful. I think it'd be good to know the nitty gritty, like show me in the documents what it is you actually disagree with, because what often happens, and this is not, I don't want to paint with a broad brush here, but what often happens is there's kind of a post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy that, hey, look, the church in the early 50s, early 60s was very strong. The church in the 70s is in chaos, and therefore Vatican II is the problem. And it just doesn't really follow logically, right? Because the world in the 1950s and the world in the 1970s is radically different. Like the world is plunged into chaos, and almost any Christian denomination you look at is going to experience the same kind of upheaval. So it's hard to blame all of the world's problems just on Vatican II. So it helps to really say, okay, show me in the text what's wrong. Show me in the text where this is wrong. And then I think it's worth just talking about the validity of church councils. Well, do you believe that Pope John the 23rd had the ability to call an ecumenical council? Do you believe ecumenical councils have the ability to pronounce on issues of faith and morals? Because those are things every Catholic has to believe in, regardless of their feelings about Vatican II. So you can get into, I hope at least the bedrock's there, and say, it's fine if you think things were implemented badly. St. Gregory of Nyssa talked about how badly the First Council of Nicaea was implemented. So it's okay to say a council is implemented poorly. That's different than rejecting the council itself.
What do you think, Vincent?
Yeah, that's a great answer. Any good literature to follow up with?
So again, it depends a little bit on the topic within Vatican II. I know Father Thomas Pink, Thomas Pink and Father Ron Rollheimer have a really good debate on how to understand Dignitatis Humanae and the Church's teaching on religious freedom. There's a series of articles. You can also find debates between the two men where they just try to make sense of, well, how do we interpret these things? How big of a change is this from what the Church was saying in the 19th century? Those kind of questions. But like I said, when you really have to have a much more specific thing than just Vatican II writ large, I think, to be able to handle it well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest problem you hear is the ecumenicanism of Vatican II.
Yeah.
Like in Nostra Aetate.
And right, that we're looking at the positive, but again, like you could go back in history and look at like the Fourth Lateran Council, what it has to say. You could look at the Council of Florence, which invited Orthodox and Coptic delegates. I mean, you can find all these times in history where the Church was very ecumenical. The Church has a very harsh reaction to the Protestant Reformation in the early days of the Reformation. But if you look at the way the Church treated the Orthodox historically, it's a different tone. There's a different kind of style to it. So it would be a mistake to say, oh, the Church has never taken a warm tone to non-Catholics. It's just not true. You just need to know a little more about, the history of the councils. And I would look at the Reunion Council, Second Leon, Fourth Lateran Council, Council of Florence, and look at the history behind those kind of councils. And you realize that this kind of ecumenism, rightly understood, is not actually that new. That finding what there is to praise and validate in non-Catholic forms of Christianity is not an unprecedented move with Vatican II, even if maybe the degree to which it happens is higher at Vatican II.
Okay, Vincent?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We got lots of folks on the line, and we're going to have a couple lines open here when we go to the break. So you go ahead and give us a call if you've got a question. 888-318-7884. Promise to give you the real Joe Heschmeyer, not the AI version, even though the AI version of Joe Heschmeyer turns out to be a pretty good theologian. One thing I have to say this, Joe, before we head into the break. I cannot understand a person who says I reject most of what the Second Vatican Council taught. Like you can't. Like, read the 16 documents. Like, are you rejecting the part where it says Christ is the light of the nations? Or like most of it is such basic, almost introductory level Christian stuff that you might say, well, I really hate the document on religious liberty, or I really hate the document on ecumenism. But Vatican II is not hard to read. I mean, you can get the 16 documents and read them. And if you're at all Catholic, most of it is going to be stuff where you go like, yeah, okay. You might just roll over it and go, that's pablum, but it's there.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth saying, I think most of the people who say they reject Vatican II have not read Vatican II documents. And, if they haven't read them charitably. They haven't read them in the way they would read any other church document. They haven't tried to read them in the faith that they deserve. Now, there are exceptions to that. I'm not saying everyone, but I'm saying in my experience that this has been much more the norm than the exception to people who think they reject Vatican II. They really reject the way the Mass is celebrated at their local church or in their experience, and the irreverence. And I also dislike irreverence in Mass, but still think Vatican II is not the reason why somebody's being irreverent in your Mass.
Yeah, so there's a kind of a post hoc ergo propter hoc there that I mean, we really did. We really have faced disaster after disaster as a church since the Second Vatican Council. So it's not that hard to go. Must be caused by the council.
Yeah, I mean, you could also blame it on like NASA's creation or something.
Yeah, because that's right.
After NASA got created, everything kind of went downhill quickly. But I think someone would say, well, that probably isn't causally related.
All right, we'll take a quick break. Be right back with more Open Forum with Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am your host, Cy Kellett. Always fun when Joe Heschmeyer is here. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joe Heschmeyer to the show. Joe is a renowned expert on the Catholic faith and is known for his ability to skillfully and clearly address the toughest questions on the topic. You like that, Joe? I decided I went back to if you weren't listening first hour, then you don't know this, but that little script was written by an AI for an artificial intelligence on the internet for how I should introduce Joe Heschmeyer.
Thomas Graff sent it to me, and I said I knew it was not. I should have known it was not really Cy because it was too nice.
I know it was. There wasn't one underhanded, backhanded, or otherwise handed compliment, so to speak. Well, Joe, let's I do want to do the one where I want you to evaluate how we're going to go back to the phones. 888-318-7884 is the number, but it answered a question about why we call Mary the Mother of God in your voice. So this is what this is. This is an artificial intelligence computer trying to imitate Joe Heschmeyer in answering the questions. And so I want to ask you the question about why we call Mary Mother of God, and then you do the AI version, and then critique it. So tell me how it did. All right. Our next,
sounds good.
This is all a script written by the artificial intelligence computer. Our next caller wants to know, why does the church teach that Mary is the Mother of God?
Another great question, Cy. The church teaches that Mary is the Mother of God because she gave birth to Jesus, who is God incarnate. The doctrine of the Incarnation states that Jesus, being fully God and fully man, took on human nature, including a human mother. So Mary can be said to be the Mother of God in the same way that we can say that any mother is the mother of her child.
Okay, this is what I'm supposed to say now. Thanks, Joe. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Let's take a quick break. We're not actually taking a quick break, but we'll be right back.
And you also don't think it's a pleasure to have me on the show.
No, of course I do think it's a pleasure to have you on the show. But I'm going to tell you from my perch as an amateur expert, I thought that's an awful good answer to why we call Mary Mother of God. What did you think?
I agree. I think the objecting to Mary as the Mother of God is a strange kind of argument because it really does reveal a weakness in how we think about Jesus as God. Because if Jesus is God, full stop, you can say, oh, Mary's not the mother of his divinity. She's just the mother of his humanity. Which would be like if someone said, oh, well, your mother's not the mother of your soul. She's just the mother of your body. It's like, no, that's not how motherhood works. That's not how the integrity of the integral nature of a human person works. That Jesus is a divine person with two natures, but he's still just one person. So yeah, it's very clear. It's very good. It's very orthodox, and I wish people would listen to that.
To the AI computer. Yeah.
Yes, fully God, fully man. That includes having a human mother.
I really liked how it said took on a human nature, including a human mother, because it is part of our nature to have a mother. I thought that was a very good job, AI computer. Even though you're not a person and you have no feelings, I have some weird need to tell you did a good job, computer. All right, let's go to Jess in Minnesota watching on the YouTube. Jess, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Thank you for taking my call. So there are two types of people that I would like some advice or possibly recommended reading in evangelizing, and they're both very different people, so I apologize about that. The first are Muslims who are incredibly reverent people but have different views than us, and then the second is the neo-pagan type who love different types of mythology but don't necessarily take Christianity seriously or maybe think it itself is pagan.
Oh, that's a great question. Those are really two really good questions. Like you said, those are going to be very different kind of questions. One thing you could do is just get more into early church history. So I'll send you a copy of my book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. But the reason I'm thinking, if there's a line that connects these two, it's this. The Muslim claim is that Jesus actually had his own gospel, and that gospel was corrupted and then lost. And so the New Testament, that's not really, we're called the people of the book, but, the Jews corrupted the Old Testament, the Christians corrupted the New Testament, and we got to wait for Islam to have uncorrupted kind of scriptures. And none of that is true historically. Meaning, this is not just a theological claim, it's also a historical claim that Jesus wrote this book, that there were these other versions of the Old and New Testament documents that then got corrupted over time. And these are just not historically plausible kind of claims. And one of the ways we can know that is by going back really early in history. Now, it's very conveniently, it's never said who actually did the corrupting or when and where and how. But if you understand anything about the way documents kind of spread, it isn't like there was one copy of the New Testament that was just floating around. It's that the 27 books that make up the New Testament were different letters that were being copied and mass circulated. And so you would have copies as far west as Spain, as far east as India. And so one of the things this means is that someone couldn't just go along and corrupt all of those copies. They couldn't corrupt all those versions. So when you read about the earliest, like 1st and 2nd century kind of history of Christianity, that's one of the things that emerges. By the time you get into like the early 200s, we still have written records from hundreds of churches around North Africa. And the reason North Africa is it's a drier climate, so documents last longer there. But we know that Christianity from east to west, despite some differences in how it looked and how it behaved, didn't look anything like the kind of Muslim claims about Christianity. So that would be one area to kind of explore, that to even accept the possibility of Muhammad as another prophet, you'd have to first believe the prophecy doesn't end with Jesus, which the early Christians are emphatic that it does. And then you'd have to take seriously the Muslim claims about the corruption of the New Testament documents. And I don't think any scholar, Christian or non-Christian, takes those claims to be credible, because they're contrary to all the data we have. So that's the Muslim side. I would say something similar for the atheist who's more interested in Norse mythology. The Norse people did not think their myths were really history, and their myths don't work logically. You know, the nature of like, oh, the whole world being produced from the body of one of the gods and all of that. Well, where is this god coming from? And this whole pantheon, you don't really have a creator god. It's a cool mythology, frankly. I was actually just listening to Norse creation myths like a week ago on Spotify, and just hearing from their perspective how they thought the world was formed. But it doesn't logically hold up. And what's more, the people almost definitely didn't think this was literally true, because you'll find like competing stories that couldn't both be true, and they don't really make a lot of sense. And they're more telling stories about the cosmos, telling stories about life, telling stories about, you know, the way things are. So to that extent, there's no historicity to Norse mythology. You couldn't say when and where did that happen, because it's an event outside of time. It's not really an event describing something that really happened. But if you say, well, when and where did Jesus of Nazareth live? Well, there are answers to that question. When and where did the resurrection happen? Well, we can answer that. And you can go back and look not only at Christian sources, but even at non-Christian sources to see, oh, look, a movement following Jesus of Nazareth really did rise up immediately following his death and apparent resurrection. And they were saying the tomb was empty, and no one was going along and showing that the tomb wasn't empty. And so logically, we'd have to say this is a stronger historical case than anything you're going to find in Norse mythology, even though Norse mythology is a lot of fun. And then the second and final thing I'd say on that is just on a logical, you might say metaphysical level, the creation of the universe by an uncreated God is internally coherent. The creation of the world in the kind of Norse way doesn't really explain anything. And it doesn't, I would say, meet the standards of logical coherence, and isn't necessarily really meant to. It's more telling a story than actually making a theological claim.
All right.
Does that help, Jess? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it does. That's really fantastic. I've always felt like these, Norse mythology type people, they have like this religious sense, and they like this mythology type stuff, but then they just don't take Christianity seriously, and I always often think about how to interact with that, because I want them to, come to the faith and that kind of thing. But yes, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Oh, good, man. My pleasure. Yeah, no, I think you're right on the money, by the way, because an obviously mythological God doesn't make big demands. I can still live the kind of selfish life I want to, and I don't have to change who I am. And I don't just say that to indict them. I think you can indict yourself and all of us. I indict myself and say, yeah, I'm selfish and I want to do things my own way. And God complicates that. And so sometimes it would be more convenient if he didn't exist. And just know that those biases are there, that they're natural, and that we have to actively kind of push against them.
Jess, thank you very much for the call. We do have to take our first break. Right back with more Open Forum with Joe Heschmeyer on Catholic Answers Live.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features daily Mass, prayers, articles, and meditations in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church. On the web at magnificat.com.
The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. The real Joe Heschmeyer, not the AI Joe Heschmeyer, is our guest this hour. Your calls are welcome. It's an open forum. Anybody can call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. I do want to alert you to the fact that Joe spoke about it a little bit last hour, but I want to remind you also check out Joe's podcast, Shameless Popery, the Shameless Popery podcast. You can find it at shamelessjoe.com. What's happening over at Shameless Popery, Joe?
Well, we tackle all kinds of questions related to the faith, often from an atheist or Protestant perspective. I know those are very different, but I don't remember what next week's. It's next week. I pre-recorded, and I can't remember offhand what it's about. But I could tell you that the most recent one is on who can forgive sins. So.
All right. We'll check it out.
Do we need, can man forgive sins? What's this deal? What's the Catholic claim? What's this deal with priests? So,
what's the deal
if that's
with...
the question you've wondered.
All right.
Yeah, what's the deal with priests? I should have named it that.
Okay, so what day of the week does Shameless Popery drop?
Thursdays. So tomorrow, another episode's coming out. Then you'll have to wait and see with me. We'll be surprised together which episode it is.
Is it up to Zach or Edgar, or who's making that decision? Right? Do we know?
Yeah, the powers that be.
The powers that be.
I think Edgar organized it. Jack organizes them too. I know Jack decided on this one because I asked him something about it, and then I still forgot. Fine,
okay.
I'll look. Tomorrow. The problem with taking the Bible literally. So.
Oh. That's a fascinating one. Okay, so there's a little bit of a challenging one, but for Catholics, very, very important, because I think a lot of Catholics are confused. I among them myself sometimes about, wait, how am I supposed to take scripture? Like which things are, because it is a little more subtle than simply everything in the Bible is literally true. So that's a good one. Problems with
and even what do we mean by literally? Yeah, so
we literally don't know. Shamelessjoe.com is where you can go. Shamelessjoe.com. Did you ever hear the old joke about why? No, I can't tell it. Well, I will. But this joke is going to offend some people because they get mad when you say a joke about teenagers. But it's just an old joke. I deal with your offense. I apologize. Okay, why do teenage girls love odd numbers?
Because they can't even.
Because they literally can't even.
Oh, darn, I missed that. I see why you were going to the literally thing.
Yeah.
In hindsight, it was right there.
All right. I apologize to all the teenage girls listening. It's just a joke. All right.
I am touched just to know you even know the phrase literally can't even. I guess you work with enough 20-somethings to.
I literally can't even. Yeah. All right. Let's go to Karina in Texas, watching on YouTube. Karina, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. My question is, we have the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed, and they're both very similar. And just wondering, why do we have both? And I know the Apostles' Creed, I think, is prayed more around Easter time. just wondering, always been wondering about why we have the both when they're both similar.
That's a great question. And the Catechism actually addresses this in paragraphs 194, 195, 196, looking at these two creeds because it says they occupy a special place in the church's life. And the short answer is there are a bunch of creeds in the early church. These were sometimes called symbols of faith or rules of faith, where like a local community would just say, well, here are the things that's really important to believe. And so the Apostles' Creed is sometimes called the oldest Roman catechism. This is the one used in Rome to ensure that people are following the faith. That is then kind of expanded upon at two ecumenical councils, the First Council of Nicaea in 325 and the First Council of Constantinople in 381. And the creed resulting from those two councils is called the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed, or usually just the Nicene Creed. That's the one you were referring to. So the Apostles' Creed is older. It's simpler. The Nicene Creed is, in the words of the Catechism, often more explicit and more detailed. Basically, in the 4th century, the church was handling some heresies that weren't addressed explicitly in the Apostles' Creed. That someone could hold the Apostles' Creed and still have some other heretical ideas. And so the Nicene Creed is fuller to make sure that people understand what we mean about the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, to address certain new heresies, or what were then new heresies that had come along. That help?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you,
bet.
Karina. Thank you very, very much for the call. I can keep moving, right? I don't have to go to a break, Darren. All right, on we go. Let's go to Alejandra, also in Texas, listening on Catholic.com. Alejandra, we're glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Joe Heschmeyer.
Hi.
Hi, Alejandra.
How are you doing?
Hi.
Very well, thank you.
Good, how are you?
Awesome. Doing good. So I grew up in the faith for most of my life, and, as I grew up, I always challenged my faith. I was into the apologetics and all that stuff, learning more how to defend my faith, to the point where I couldn't answer my own questions. I was asking so many. So my question to you guys is something that's been on my mind. Why are there missing books in the Bible? Is it because it does not fit the agenda of the Catholic Church, or they just don't want us to know everything? I want to know.
Wait, so when you say why are there missing books in the Bible, which books do you have in mind?
The Book of Enoch, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip. There's many that have not been included into the 73 original books of the Bible.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great question, Alejandra. And first of all, I commend the kind of integrity and intensity with which you're approaching the question. I think that's really good. But second, the history of those books, speaking broadly here, I might actually leave the Book of Enoch aside because there's a separate kind of history there. When we're talking about like the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, those kind of questions, those books are largely 2nd century AD, meaning they're written like a century after the apostles by people who claim to be the apostles and obviously aren't. In technical terms, we would say they're pseudo-epigraphical, but in common terms, we'd say they're forgeries. Like, this is someone pretending, if I wrote a book saying, I, Abraham Lincoln, would like to tell you what the Civil War was like, you would say, I don't accept that book. Not because I don't want to know more about Lincoln's life, but because that's not going to be a reliable way to find out about Lincoln's life, to find out from someone pretending to be Lincoln who isn't Lincoln. Well, likewise, someone pretending to be the Apostle Thomas or St. Peter or fill in the blank. So we know from looking at the earliest Christians which books they did and didn't consider to be inspired and canonical. And one of the things they were looking at is, did this really come from an apostle or not? Or did it come from someone who was a companion of the apostles? So, for instance, when in the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Mark and Luke aren't apostles. But Mark is the translator for St. Peter, and Luke is a companion of St. Paul. Now, this is going to be really important for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is actually a testament to their authenticity. Like, if you're going to pretend to be someone in the 1st century, you're not going to choose Mark. You're not going to choose Luke. They're too obscure. But if you actually are Mark, you're just going to be like, well, I'm Mark. That's who I am. Second, the Gospels, like the 4 authentic Gospels, are internally anonymous. And so even a skeptic like Bart Ehrman, who's an ex-Christian, acknowledges that this is one of the proofs that these are the first ones. They don't say, I, John, tell you this. I, Matthew, tell you that. No, because at the time they're written, people knew who they were from because it was from someone they knew. And so they didn't have to kind of blow the horn about their own authority because they actually had that authority. It's later forgers who have to pretend to be someone they're not that are constantly overplaying their hand and kind of exaggerating all the I, Thomas, saw such and such kind of thing. So in short, we don't accept those books because they aren't really from the people they claim to be from. They aren't really from the time they claim to be from. They aren't orthodox, meaning they don't agree with the actual teachings of Jesus Christ. They don't agree with what the people who actually were his apostles believed and taught and proclaimed. And so they're just kind of elaborate forgery. And moreover, when you read the writings of the early Christians, they overwhelmingly rejected these books and didn't take them seriously. It's much more recent history that we've tried to kind of place these books alongside the real books as if there was a real challenge about which ones were going to be accepted and rejected. But if you read the writings of the early Christians, nobody is saying, I think we should accept the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Peter or Mary Magdalene or any of those, because they were universally or nearly universally regarded as the hoaxes we now know them to be. Does that make sense, Alejandro?
It makes sense, but to me it's like who is saying that these are reliable sources or not? And I just want to know, I guess you said how it doesn't agree with the teachings of Jesus, but in a way that's kind of in my head saying that the church did reject it because it doesn't agree with their agenda.
Well, so the teachings of Jesus were known before anyone put pen to paper about the New Testament. The teachings of Jesus were known because Jesus walked around and preached. And the apostles went to cities and villages and preached. And so if you have heard Jesus preach and then you get a document that totally disagrees with that and someone says it's from Jesus, you would recognize in an instance that that's not really from Jesus. It totally contradicts everything you know about Jesus. That in other words, ordinary people knew what Jesus taught because Jesus was a public person and preached publicly. And they knew what the apostles taught because the apostles were public people who preached publicly. So it's not just, well, the institutional church says so. It's like, no. There were hundreds of witnesses and there were eyewitnesses. And that's an important check. So when the Gnostics in the 2nd century start circulating these obviously fictitious texts, it wasn't just, the message is wrong. It's also, we knew Thomas and he never released anything like this. And the first we hear of it is in the mid-100s. That's really good evidence that it's not really authentic, that it's not really authoritative. Because when the actual apostles wrote documents, you know what happened? The people received those and made copies and invited other people to come read them. And so if a document doesn't appear until the mid-100s, then it definitely isn't real. Because if it were real, the people in the 1st century would have been copying it, they would have been talking about it, we would find some kind of evidence of it. So those kind of historical things, it's not just that we disagree with the content, it's that the dating and the authorship are also basically universally rejected. And here I want to stress, not just rejected by Catholics, not just rejected by Christians, but even secular scholars will acknowledge that the Gnostic texts are, for the most part, 2nd century or even later. And they're preaching something wildly different than anything taught in Judaism or Christianity. Like they're teaching a complicated polytheism.
Alejandra, I hope that all that was helpful to you. We do have to move on, but I want to suggest something. Well, first of all, I want to give you Gary Michuda's book, Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger, because I think you'll enjoy it with these questions that you have. And also, I tried to give it away. Can we
consider also Jimmy's book?
The Bible is a Catholic book?
The Bible is a Catholic book?
Who's going to pay for it, me or you? Okay, yeah, we can send them both. All right, hang on, Alejandra. But I wanted to say we don't often get a call where we did a full focus episode with almost the exact question word for word, and so we did a focus episode. I can't remember, maybe a year ago, and it's called "Is the Church Hiding the Book of Enoch?" And it's with Tim Staples. So if you just type into your Googleizer Tim Staples Book of Enoch, you'll find it. Is the Church Hiding the Book of Enoch? So Edgar, if you'll pick up with her and give her those 2 books, I hope we'll get to speak again, Alejandra. Thank you very, very much. Let's see. Where can we go? Who can we go to next, Joe? How about if we go to Hannah in Georgia?
All right.
Watching on YouTube. Hannah, thanks for being with us. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Happy to.
I'm a new convert, and my husband is Protestant.
Well, first of all, Hannah, welcome home.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So I came across Jimmy Akin's article where I learned that we're not obligated to forgive those who haven't asked for forgiveness, even after we've made an attempt to let them know our offense. But my husband wanted to know what his church teaches on this issue. They refer to Matthew 18, where a man is, the parable there, and they say that a man is forgiven who did not ask to be forgiven. He only asked for more time to pay the debt.
Hang on, Hannah, we'll get to it right after. We got to take a quick break.
Anyway.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity in The Early Church Was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Catholic Answers Live is 25 years old. That's a quarter century helping people come into deeper communion with the Catholic faith. As we move into our second quarter century, please help us reach thousands more by becoming a Society 315 monthly donor. Right now, when you join Society 315 at a monthly giving level of $25 or more, we've added some extra perks to the other great benefits we already offer members. Go to givecatholic.com and choose the monthly option to start your donation.
As a child, the great theologian Thomas Aquinas asked, "What is God?" Best-selling author Kevin Vost's new book follows the mature thought of Aquinas in answering that question. In clear and approachable fashion, What is God examines God's attributes and considers questions about him that have vexed mankind for centuries. Order your copy of What is God today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Janet Williams. We bring you the truth of the Catholic faith on Women of Grace tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's funny, I need Hannah to forgive me right in the middle of a call about forgiveness because I didn't handle the clock well and she didn't get to get her whole question out. So I hope you will forgive me or do forgive me, Hannah. But go ahead, if you just repeat the question to Joe. Wait.
There's no need to forgive. But
oh, okay. Well, thanks.
On the Matthew 18 parable, their explanation is that a man is forgiven and he did not ask to be forgiven. He only asked for more time to pay the debt, but the master forgave the debt anyway. And they said that it's important for us to note because the master represents God who forgave us without even asking. In the Lord's Prayer, we find that we are to forgive as we have been forgiven, meaning that we're to forgive in the same manner. So regardless of whether a person asks for forgiveness or not, we're obligated to forgive in order to be forgiven by God. And we just can't figure out which is the correct teaching or which one we should follow. So I was trying to see if you could help us figure out if our forgiveness by God is predicated upon us forgiving those who haven't asked for any forgiveness.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so if you're saying, well, I don't know which one to go with, I would say go with the one that involves more forgiveness, because we know that is it's from God, it's of God. So certainly that's the side you want to err on, right? So in the Lord's Prayer, we pray that we'll be forgiven as we forgive those who trespass against us. And Jesus is very clear that if we won't forgive others, we won't be forgiven. So run away as a matter of salvific importance from holding on to unforgiveness. Unforgiveness only hurts you. Now, we could talk about what we mean by forgiveness there. Forgiving someone doesn't mean you just tell them like, hey, no big deal that you hurt me, or no big deal that you're continuing to hurt me. That's not the Christian idea of forgiveness. But it is letting go of the unforgiveness against them. It is that internal resolution. And one of the things that we're called to do is pray for those who've offended us. And so, St. Peter asked Jesus pretty directly about those who are just repeatedly offending us. He says, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times. And Jesus says, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. And some translations have 77 times 7. The actual number isn't really the issue. The point is that you should be relentless in forgiveness. And so the Catechism looks at the Lord's Prayer when we ask to be forgiven as we forgive those who trespass against us. And we're told in paragraph 2844 that Christian prayer extends to the forgiveness of enemies. That you don't wait until you've been reconciled with the person to pray for them. You don't wait till you've been reconciled with the person to forgive them. That this is actually how we're transfigured to become more like Christ. We're told forgiveness is a high point of Christian prayers, and that only hearts attuned to God's compassion can receive the gift of prayer. And pointing out that so the Catechism goes on to say the martyrs of yesterday and today bear this witness to Jesus. In other words, the martyrs, think about St. Stephen as he's being stoned to death, and he says, forgive them, they don't know what they do. He's echoing the words of Jesus on the cross. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus doesn't wait on the cross until the people crucifying him come up to say sorry. He forgives them proactively. And that's what we're called to do. That's the actual model. So I'd say 2844 answers that, I think, pretty directly. And then paragraph 2845 says there's no limit or measure to this essentially divine forgiveness. That we're always debtors. We're always in need to be forgiven. And so we need to constantly be forgiving those who've offended us, who've hurt us, both in the sense of sinning against us and being indebted to us. Maybe they didn't do something they should have done for us. That however we've been failed, however we've been wronged, to not hold on to that animosity, not hold on to those grudges, but to be very proactive about letting those go in the name of forgiveness and praying for the good of those who have wronged us. Like, that's the Christian model. Again, it doesn't mean the thing doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to be hurt by it, or that you don't have different boundaries with the person. If somebody is constantly stealing from you, maybe you don't loan them money. Those kind of things are totally fine. That is not a question of forgiveness. You can be prudent. You can learn from it. But you need to actually be able to let go of the animosity that you might otherwise have, because if you just hold it over their head, if you won't pray for them, if you won't wish the good of them, you're only endangering your own salvation, I would say.
Hannah, what do you think?
Thank you for that response. If I could only ask one more thing. On Luke 17:3-4, it says, if your brother or sister sins against you, rebuke them. If they repent, forgive them. Even if they sin against you 7 times in a day and 7 times come back to you saying, I repent, you must forgive them. Jimmy's article was about that, and he said that we're not obligated to forgive if the other person is not sorry for their sin. So if repentance is required, we are to forgive as God forgives, but God doesn't just forgive without us repenting. So if we're just throwing away forgiveness, we're cheapening forgiveness because the person doesn't even want the forgiveness. Even after we've approached them and they've, rebuked them, they don't have any desire to be forgiven. What do we do with that? That's our biggest issue.
That's a great question. And I haven't read Jimmy's article. I should begin with that. So I don't take this to be me responding to an article I haven't read. But I would say, certainly if someone comes to you asking for forgiveness, that really creates an impetus to forgive at that moment. But nevertheless, the limits to our forgiveness are not just waiting for someone to come around and say sorry to us, because we see a greater model on the cross and a greater model from St. Stephen and the martyrs who forgive their enemies, even while their enemies are putting them to death or hurting them. St. Maria Goretti would be another example of this. So that's the actual model of the saints. And that's what we should be striving for, even if we fall short of it.
Hannah, what a beautiful relationship you and your husband have, puzzling over these very fine points of the gospel of Jesus Christ, trying to live that faithfully together. It's a beautiful witness.
Oh, I think a lot of husbands and wives figure out how much they have to forgive.
Yeah, well,
maybe not.
No, actually, how little, I think in many cases, how little do I have to do? But
that 70 times 7 punch card, I went through that pretty quickly in marriage, I think.
Yeah, your wife has a 7,000 times 7,000 punch card that she's working on. But Hannah, it is a beautiful witness, and I know that it can be difficult in marriage when one's a Catholic and one's not. We have a couple books I'd like to give you if you want them, maybe to share. One is Why We're Catholic by Trent Horn. The other one, The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It, by the aforementioned Jimmy Akin. These might be good prompts for conversations between the two of you. And I hope you will call again, Hannah, and I hope your husband will call sometime if he'd like as well. And I promise if you call back, I'll look at the clock carefully and I won't make you start your question right when the music's starting to play. You got her, Edgar? Okay. We'll go to Casey in Ohio, watching on YouTube. Casey, thanks for your patience. Go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Yep. Joe, it's good for you?
Good.
Should we test it again? Let's test it again. Go ahead and try it.
I can hear you from
Okay.
KC.
Okay. Oh, from KC?
Thank you. Okay. I am a baby Catholic, brand new, and I have a question
Welcome home.
that I can't. Thank you. Very happy.
Oh, wonderful.
I love the Rosary so much. The Rosary was what I think brought me home. And I love sharing it. There's that deep scar from being from like a non-denominational Protestant all my life background that repetitive, you're doing something wrong when you pray it, right? So when I love to share it, and particularly with people I care about who are Protestant and they get really uncomfortable, there's this one verse that I trip up on that I can't, like most of it I can say, John at the foot of the cross and Revelation, I'm comfortable with that. But there's this one verse, Galatians 1 verse 8, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we preach to you, let him be accursed. And today I was, because, I love the gospel, I hold on in faith.
Amen,
to
sister.
the Rosary. But I was listening to St. Louis de Montfort's The Secrets of the Rosary, and it kept saying that Mary appeared to St. Dominic and said, preach the Rosary. And I'm like, I know the mysteries of the gospel are the heart of what's being said there, but I don't know how to say it and explain it to somebody who doesn't know what I know.
Do you have any concern, Casey, that the Rosary itself is part of a falsifying of the gospel in contradiction to what Paul said?
No, because I understand the mystery.
Oh, okay. But you can't convince other people of that.
I can't explain it in words. I can only... I start to stumble. Do you know what I mean? Like I start to not be able to articulate.
Have you ever listened to this show, Casey? I know what you mean. I don't know if Joe knows what you mean, but
So,
I definitely know what you mean about stumbling.
The whole first year, right before I went to RCIA, this show was the only thing I watched.
Oh,
it helped a lot.
That's such a beautiful thing.
That's wonderful.
Well, thanks for joining us for all that. Joe, can you help out with the Rosary?
I can certainly try. So Pope Paul VI refers to the Rosary as the compendium of the entire gospel. What that means is that the point of the Rosary is not, hey, ignore the gospel and look at the Rosary instead. The point of the Rosary is to take particular mysteries from the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ and to prayerfully dive into them, to just really go deep in them in a spirit of prayer. And so I think a well-formed Protestant would agree it's important not just to read about the works of Jesus, but also to pray about the works of Jesus. And if if they're of a certain disposition, they would probably recognize, well, it's also important not to just do that alone, but that it should be done with others, and that the saints are actually there to help point us to Christ. That's certainly what Scripture says. In Hebrews 11, there's that spiritual hall of fame of all of the great saints who've come before. And then in Hebrews 12, it says, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Now, what's the imagery Paul's using there? Or, the author of Hebrews is using there? It's that of like running a race. And this is the cheering section that's cheering you on, but that also have gone before you to show you how to do it. And so that's our relationship to the saints, that we want to engage in Scripture with the saints, not to draw us away from the gospel, but because they point us deeper into what it is to live out faith. They show us what Christian faith looks like. They show us what fidelity to Jesus looks like. They unpack in their own lives the mysteries of the gospel. And so the rosary, rightly understood and prayed in the right way, really is a compendium of the whole gospel. It's taking the gospel and learning to appreciate it anew. You can read the story 1,000 times, but when you actually pray on it, it makes a difference. It changes things. Does that make sense? I'll address the repetitive prayer part in a second, but does that part make sense?
Yes, that definitely does make sense to me.
Oh, good.
And yeah,
and again,
this is prayer part, that would be helpful.
Okay, great. Well, what I like to point out is what's forbidden is vain repetitions. That if you just say like the magic words enough times from a pagan perspective, you're going to get what you want. That's not what we believe about prayers of the rosary. It's not what we believe about repetitive. In other words, it's not repetitive prayer that's condemned. It's vain repetition. It's repetition simply for the sake of repetition that's forbidden. And you know who engages in repetitive prayer? Jesus. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Matthew 26, he goes into the garden and he prays the same prayer 3 times. 26 Verse 44 says, so, leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words. Now, if you literally think repetitive prayer is a problem, then you'd have to say Jesus sinned in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is obviously wrong. And so it's just like, well, okay, clearly it's okay to say prayers more than one time. And if you look at the Psalms, they often have repetitive portions. And that's okay. We're not trying to do magical incantation by repeating things. And so it actually becomes a certain kind of Protestant legalism to say, oh, you can only say the words the exact same way once. If you do it the exact same way twice, then it's repetitive. Like, no, that's such a bizarre distortion of what Jesus is forbidding in Matthew 6. It totally misunderstands it. It's contrary to the entire New and Old Testament. It's clearly okay to say the same prayers more than once. Jesus gives us a form prayer, the Our Father, to pray regularly, right? The Didache in the 1st century tells people to be sure to pray the Our Father 3 times a day. It's okay to do that. That's like the Psalms wouldn't exist unless we were meant to pray them over and over again. So repetitive prayer is actually not something condemned in Scripture at all. Vain repetition is something condemned, but that's a different thing entirely.
All right.
Glad you said that about Protestant legalism. I felt that a lot, but I was like, is that just me? I didn't know.
No, it really is. I mean, they're trying to be faithful, and I love it, but it is a very legalistic way of taking the words of Jesus.
It's like an overcorrection, kind of. Can I ask one more clarifying thing? Because I feel like I'm worried about getting something wrong when I explain it.
Okay.
And particularly with my dad. You know how Mary is the new Ark of the New Covenant, obviously you know, and Jesus is the New Covenant. Is it weird for me to try to explain to my dad that, like, the Hail Mary is almost like the Ark of the Covenant of prayer with Jesus at the center, and it's like a blessing of Jesus? Is that a weird way to explain it? Does that make sense
really cool
to anybody
explaining it? Yeah, no, I think there's something very beautiful about it. No, I think there's something very beautiful about that. That Jesus is literally the center of the prayer. And so you have this prayer that's addressed to Mary that's oriented towards Jesus. And that's something that we should take seriously. The structure of the prayer is very Christocentric.
When you were a kid, Joe, and you learned to pray the rosary or to pray the Hail Mary, Were you taught to bow your head at the name of Jesus? Because that's the way my mother and grandmother taught me, and I do think that's one thing
I wasn't taught that as a kid, but there is in the general instruction of the Roman Missal. At Mass, you should bow your head at the name of Jesus, and then at the name of Mary and at the name of the saint of the day, we also do a reverential bow. That's certainly true for the priest. It's a good practice for the laity as well, and it's not something the church gives instructions on in private prayer. But it's a nice way of really bringing that kind of reverence, that spirit of reverence, and it flows into the idea that, at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.
Yeah.
In this case, every head shall bow.
I just feel like some Protestants maybe who think that we're worshiping Mary or something when we pray the Rosary might be comforted to know that, Catholic mothers all around the world teach their children to bow their head at the name of Jesus when they teach them that prayer. But Casey, I've enjoyed this conversation. Do you have more? Or are you all set?
Oh, I'm sorry. Wasn't Jesus always said, honor your father and your mother, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's Moses who said that first.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you guys.
Well, Jesus told them to.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Casey, it was a great pleasure to get to talk with you. If you'd like a copy of our little book we have called 20 Answers to the Rosary, I'd be happy to send it to you. Just hang on the line, and Edgar will get to you, and we'll send you 20 Answers the Rosary. The number 888-318-7884. We got some lines open, but we'll see if we can get to you. I got to take a break already? Okay, let me take a break, and then I'll get to Stephen and another Casey right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
EWTN is everywhere. EWTN radio programming is provided free of charge to over 500 domestic and international AM and FM radio stations. It's a great teaching tool for Catholics and non-Catholics alike. For a complete list of EWTN AM and FM stations across America, visit EWTNradio.net. At the bottom of the page, click Affiliates. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
A lot of people think that street evangelization involves yelling out of a bullhorn telling people that they're going to hell. Not so with St. Paul's Street Evangelization. Our methods are non-confrontational and effective. We simply offer information on the Catholic faith along with rosaries, miraculous medals, and prayer. Pope Francis wrote about how beautiful it is to see street preachers joyfully bringing Jesus to every corner of the earth. Street evangelization is fun and fruitful. Join us today at streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm the real Cy Kellett. That's the real Joe Heschmeyer, and this is the real Open Forum. I say that only because AI is trying to take over our jobs, and it's doing a pretty good job of it, but we're not going to allow it. We're staying here. Let's go to Alexandria, Virginia. Stephen in Alexandria, Virginia, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. We're glad you're here. Stephen, go ahead with your question for Joe.
Yes. Good evening, gentlemen. I have a question pertaining to the beginning of Ordinary Time, which began yesterday. So this past Sunday, January 8th, was the last Sunday of the Christmas season in the liturgical calendar. And then Ordinary Time began yesterday, January 10th. Okay?
Right.
And then this coming Sunday, the 15th...
Or actually Monday the 9th.
Okay, wait, well, but let's go ahead. Sunday the 15th.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the question really is, this coming Sunday, January 15th, is the second Sunday in Ordinary Time, but last Sunday was not the first Sunday in Ordinary Time. So it appears as though there was no first Sunday in Ordinary Time. It went from the Christmas season in January 8th.
I would just like to say, welcome to the Catholic Church. What is the problem?
Yes.
Why is that? Yeah, okay.
No, I like that this is your problem. I mean, this one, I'm comfortable with this level of problem. No, and it actually is super annoying because it's technically the Sunday of the second week of Ordinary Time.
Right.
Because it's
Do you see
the
what
first.
I mean?
It's
So,
the first day of the second week.
It is the first Sunday of Ordinary Time is the Sunday of the second week of Ordinary Time, but because that's very confusing, so you're absolutely right. There is no first Sunday of Ordinary Time. There should be, but there's no way to make that happen without making Sunday the last day of the week instead of the first, or without adding an entire 6 more days of Christmas, which I think is fine with, but it's not how it works. That Christmas ends with the Sunday in which we celebrate the Epiphany, and then so you have Monday of week 1, Tuesday of week 1, and then when you get to Sunday, you're at week 2. So you actually start with the second Sunday. As confusing and as obviously imperfect as that is.
It kind of reminds me of Christ likening his resurrection to Jonah being in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, when Christ, like, there was no third night. It was really 2 nights and 3 days and all. But I guess it's all anything's possible with God, and it all depends on how you want to account for time, I suppose.
And he's the founder of the Catholic Church.
Right.
So we're using his complicated calendar, right? I mean, you add to that, there's a whole other set of issues with the fact that the Jewish calendar begins at nightfall, and the Roman calendar begins at midnight, and the Catholic Church uses both of them. The Jewish one for liturgical stuff, the Roman one for canon law stuff, and occasionally it's just kind of a you make do with what you can. It's sort of an imperfect solution in some of these situations.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Happy New Year to
Absolutely.
both.
Happy New Year, Stephen. Enjoy the third Sunday of Ordinary Time coming up. Let's go to Casey. This is our second Casey of the day. Casey in Chicago, Illinois, listening on Catholic.com. Casey, go ahead with your question for Joe.
Hi. Hi. I just want to say thank you guys for taking my call.
Sure.
Yeah.
But my question is, with the rise of the LGBTQ plus community and all that, and more people joining that, I wish to know if especially the trans community, if it is immodest to be in a changing room or a locker room with someone who is of that community.
Gotcha.
Oh, a changing room or a locker. So you're with people who are biologically of the other sex, is that right?
I don't know if I am, but I just wish to know if it would be, if that did come up.
Yeah, that's a complicated one. That I don't know if I am is very important, because in many cases we don't know. But Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that it is a complicated situation, because you have issues about how a person's presenting themselves surgically, if they've done things to themselves, all kinds of questions. So you want to avoid presenting yourself to someone who's sexually attracted to you in a way that would be immodest, or potentially sexually attracted to you that would be immodest. That's also true in terms of someone who may be, homosexually oriented, changing in front of them, those kind of issues. Modesty issues arise when you've got a person of the opposite sex or a person who is attracted to the same sex. And so given that, it's appropriate to avoid putting yourself intentionally in that situation. I think that'd be the kind of shortish answer to what is often a very complicated question in terms of bathrooms, locker rooms, and the like, that you should treat your neighbor by not putting them in an situation, and you should avoid putting yourself in a situation where you're likely to be unduly sexualized, if you can avoid that in any means.
Okay, now, did that get to what you were looking for, Casey?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Casey. Thanks very much for the call. Joe Heschmeyer, our guest, Open Forum. These are very complicated times, and it's the complication. I really liked how you answered that, Joe, because I would not have thought of it as the primary reason for modesty is out of respect for those who. I know. I was thinking. I don't know if there's anybody on earth that I have to worry about being immodest around anymore, because you said the thing about taking a sexual interest in you, but that's its purpose. But these are tough times. We just have to remember every single human being is precious in the eyes of God. Try to do what is most respectful to that person in whatever situation you find yourself in with them.
Absolutely.
Joe, you pulled off that jacket. I didn't know at the beginning of the show if you were going to do it, but you pulled it off.
I'm still wearing it.
No, you didn't pull it off in that way, but you pulled it off in a fashion sense that you made it work. Somehow,
thank you. I appreciate
made that jacket work.
I hope it did not infringe upon modesty in any way.
Please tell Anna I'm on her side. as far as this goes. As a matter of fact, any disputes in your marriage, I'm on her side.
It's always safe.
Who we got tomorrow, Darren? We got Jimmy? Yeah. Oh, Jimmy and Carla for Open Forum tomorrow. So join us then, because we'll do this all again. Thank you again, Joe Heschmeyer. ShamelessJoe.com. 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 If you repeat it like that, then I don't know. It's very fancy. All right, see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye,
Catholic Answers Live.